This conference will now be recorded.
Okay. So today I'm going to explain clinical trial process, CT process. I'm going to explain the role of CDM, okay, in the complete life cycle of the clinical trial, how the CDM is important. What is the role of CDM in and around the clinical trial process? Okay. So, what are all the job roles that you can apply? Where where you can apply? In which type of companies you can apply? And the curriculum, what are all I'm going to cover? Curriculum, what are all I'm going to cover? Okay. And we also have a duration. We also have duration. So this is all I'm going to explain. So clinical trial, knowing clinical trial is basic and fundamental. That's the reason as part of our curriculum, I'm including clinical trials theory also. Because without this clinical trial knowledge, we cannot go with the CDM. So the terminology that you must know, okay, documentation, guidelines you must know. So all these will be covered, documents, guidelines related to clinical trial, related to CDM. Okay. So let me go with the clinical trial process. So first of all, what is clinical trial? What is clinical trial? Clinical trial is nothing but testing the new product. Any product, it can be the drug, it can be the device, it can be the procedure, any surgical procedure, any operators, vaccine, anything, any new product before it comes into market, before it release into market, okay, we should first test the drug on, okay, human beings. But while testing, even directly we cannot test it on the human beings also. Before marketing, test the drug on human beings. But before you start the human trials, your drug should be tested on animals. So this animal testing is called preclinical trial. So pharma companies responsible for conducting studies, pharma or sponsoring companies. They do research and development. They do R&D. They do research and development. So once they do R&D, they will release the drug into market. They'll release the drug into market. Okay. So but before they go to market, they should get approvals from the concerned regulatory bodies. So before that, we should test the drug on animals. We should also test the drug on human beings. So the first step is preclinical trial, also called non-clinical trial. Okay, some people will call it as phase 0, but actually preclinical is not phase 0. Phase 0, we have clinical trials only. In the first phase, it's called phase 0. So, animal trials called preclinical, it is also called non clinical. Preclinical, non clinical. Okay. So, preclinical, non clinical is nothing but testing the drug on, okay, animals. Animals like guinea pig, rat, mice, monkeys. So they will test the drug here in the labs. They'll perform this testing in the lab. So the okay, main objective of the preclinical trial is pharmacology, toxicology. Pharmacology, toxicology. This is pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamics. Pharmacology in terms of pharmacokinetics and dynamics. Toxicology, we have different types of toxicology. So in the kinetics and dynamics, what drug does to the body, it is dynamics. What body does to the drug, it is kinetics. Like that, we study, so we assess safety and efficacy in terms of pharmacology and toxicology. In terms of pharmacology and toxicology. Okay. After completion of this preclinical studies, before we get into before we get into clinical trial, next step is clinical trials. Clinical trials nothing but testing the new product on, testing the new drug on human beings with the main objective to assess the safety and efficacy of the new drug. But before we get into clinical trial, before we start clinical trial, okay, so we should get approval from, okay, FDA. FDA, so in fact we call it as regulatory authority. Different countries, different regulatory bodies. So we have FDA in US, in Europe countries it is EMA, UK it is MHRA, India it is CDSCO. Like that, different countries, different regulatory bodies, different regulatory bodies. So we should get approval. This approval is called investigational approval. The approval is called investigational approval. Okay. So because further we need to investigate the drug on human beings. That's the reason it is called investigational approval. Whatever the data that we are collecting from the preclinical trials, all this data will be part of INDA. It's application called INDA. That means before we get into market, we should submit, pharmaceutical companies should submit INDA application to the regulatory authorities. Okay, investigational new drug application. We include all the preclinical trial data in this application. Sponsor will wait for some time, like pharmaceutical companies. Then they start the, once they get approval, they start the clinical trial. Okay, clinical trial is nothing but testing the drug on human beings with the main objective of safety as well efficacy of the new drug. Okay, safety and efficacy of the new drug. So this will be done in 3 phases. Actually, we have 5 phases, but I'm not explaining phase 0 right now. We have phase 0 also, but I'm starting with phase 1. Phase 1, in detail process, we are going to discuss later. So phase 1, okay, safety and only safety. Phase 1, safety, pharmacology. Safety and pharmacology. So 20 to 80 people will be involved. All are healthy people. In the phase 1, we recruit healthy volunteers. Phase 2, we have number will differ, 100 to 300 people will recruit. All are deceased people, because along with the safety, we study the efficacy also. How drug working on the particular disease. We need to know whether drug is safe or not. We also need to know whether drug is effective on the particular disease. Third phase, 1000 to 3000 people will be there. Third phase, 1000 to 3000 people will be there. Okay. All the 1000 to 3000 people will be deceased again. So, safety and efficacy. Safety as well, efficacy of the drug. Okay. After completion of the third phase, before we get into market, the marketing phase is called phase 4. Phase 4 will start as and when the drug is released into market. Phase 4 is called as and when the drug is phase 4 will start, in fact, as and when the drug is released into market. Okay, so phase 4 before we get into fourth phase, we should again get approval. This approval is from the regulatory authorities, but this approval is called marketing approval. Previously, it was investigational approval. Now it is marketing approval. Okay. So, marketing approval that we should get by submitting NDA, which is new drug application. Which is new drug application. So, it is the application by which pharmaceutical companies will get approval from the regulatory authorities by including all the preclinical trials data, all the phase 1 to phase 3 data, all the clinical trials data. With this data, they'll review and they decide. Regulatory people will decide whether to approve the drug or reject the drug, whether to give approvals or not. Okay. So this is what NDA application. NDA is a new drug application. As and when the drug is released into market, we'll start monitoring the drug even after marketing in order to detect the rare, unusual, and long-term adverse effects. Rare, unusual, as well long-term side effects which are not seen, not observed, not occurred before during clinical trials. Because here, once the drug is released into market, different people will be exposed with different food habits, different lifestyle, different medications, different diseases. Okay, lot of people will be involved here. That's the reason we'll get chance to see rare, unusual, long-term side effects, which may not be observed in phase 1 to phase 3 clinical trials. Okay, so this is what your step 1 to step 5, preclinical to marketing phase, preclinical trials to marketing phase. So, in the entire process, in the 5-step process, if you can observe, pharmaceutical companies, sponsoring companies, they are the one, pharmaceutical companies are the one, they are going to sponsor fund the clinical trial. They finance the clinical trial. They organize the clinical trials. So, pharmaceutical companies, throughout the process, they ultimately should get approvals from the FDA. My question is, how many approvals do we need? How many approvals do we need? Two approvals. Perfect. So we even after phase 1, phase 2 also we need approvals, but majorly I'm categorizing into two approvals. One is investigational approval, other one is marketing approval. Okay. In order to get this, the two approval names are investigational approval. Further, we need to investigate the drug with this approval. Marketing approval. So we are going to release the drug into market with this approval. The two approvals, we should submit the data. For the two approvals, we should submit the data. But the thing is, this data is the raw data. This data is a huge data. This data is a non-standard data. This data is complex data. This data is complex data. Okay. So with all these problems, we cannot directly submit the data to FDA. So the data is not good enough to, as and when you collect the data, it's not good enough to submit it to regulatory authorities. Definitely, pharmaceutical companies should process this data: validation, cleaning, analysis, representation, reporting. Okay. In case of the pharmaceutical companies, if they have the complete setup, if they have technical teams, if they have manpower, if they have databases, they do process. Some pharma companies do that. They do process the data, but most of the times they outsource to other companies called CRO, Contract Research Organization. Okay, CRO. So CRO is a contract research organization. It is the company contracted by the pharmaceutical companies to manage the clinical trials. Not only conducting clinical trials, even they manage the data. Okay. So there are three teams working on the data. That means CRO, on behalf of the sponsor, it will work on the data, clean the data, analyze the data, prepare the reports, then submit to FDA. So we have three teams working on the data. We have other teams also, but majorly I'm going to explain these three teams which are working on the data. So now we are going to learn the data flow As part of this data flow, you're going to learn um, the role of CDM also, because one of the team is CDM team. So clinical trial team, CDM team, also SAS teams, statistical teams. So where exactly clinical trial team work, where exactly they sit, they'll be working at the site. It's called study center, study site, um, clinical site. It's a place where we conduct the clinical trial. But most of the trials will be multi-centered. Most of the trials will be multi-centered trials. That means in the multiple locations, we are going to conduct the clinical trials. Okay. What exactly they do then? In the clinical trial can be done in any place like pharmacy, hospital, medical universities, colleges, but they need to have the complete setup enough to conduct the clinical trials. So the first part, as a first step, they recruit the subjects. Here the patients are called subjects. They recruit the subjects as per the criteria. The criteria is the eligibility criteria. The criteria will be eligibility criteria. Okay. So it is called eligibility criteria. As per that criteria, they'll recruit the patients. As and when they recruit, immediately we are not going to give them the drug. They collect the baseline data. Baseline data means whatever the data that is collected before we start the treatment, it's called baseline data. As an example, so example demographics, vitals, okay, lab test, LB, lab parameters, medical history, okay. So this raw data will be collected. PE, physical examination, any data that is collected before we start the treatment, it's called baseline data. It's called baseline data. So after this, we'll start the treatment. Treatment with the new drug, experimental drug. Okay. Again, we'll be collecting the data at the different follow-up visits. Collecting data at the different follow-up visits. All this data will be collected on the forms called CRF, case report forms. This whole data will be collected on the forms called CRF, case report forms. Whatever the data before the treatment, after the treatment, whatever the data will be collected on the forms called CRF, case report form. Okay. So CRF is a case report form which is used to collect the data from the patients. Now you have all your data on the case report forms. But this is raw data. We cannot directly submit this data to regulatory authorities. So we need the help of CDM, clinical data management. So your data will be captured into CDM databases, then will validate the data. So CDM ultimate role is to clean and validate the data. They ensure that the data is clean, complete, accurate, and in the logical sequence. In the logical sequence. So it is to clean and validate the data using databases, using different databases, using different EDC tools. EDC tools. Okay. So they handle the raw data. So what do you mean by raw data? Raw data is the invalid data, inconsistent data, illogical data, invalid, inconsistent, illogical, incomplete data, like missing data, inaccurate data, like that. So different types of data is called raw data. I'll just show you one example here. You can just look at the CRF. We have discrepancies here, you see. In this one, we have one discrepancy. Can you identify that?
No, on the vital
Hmm. So vital signs
signs.
collected, but they selected no here. They should have select yes, right? Because there's already vital signs collected on the CRF. So this is invalid data. In this one, if you can look at injection site reaction.
The thing, the onset date is after the resolution date.
So resolution date is after the start. Resolution date should be always after the start date. Stop date should be always after the start date, but here it is given before it. Okay. So this is illogical data. You have missing data also, you see. Here the data is missing. See, was sample collected, date of sample missing. Here the date of sample given, was sample collected missing. Like this, we do have missing data also. So CDM is going to handle all this data. Okay, what they do, CDM will ensure all the data is captured into databases. As and when they captured, okay, as and when the data is captured, we'll run validation checks. So what are these validation checks? These are called edit checks. These are the validations and these are called edit checks. Okay, it's called edit checks. run the validation checks. These are called edit checks. These can be the system checks. It can be the manual checks because all the errors, all the discrepancies may not be identified through the system checks. May not be identified through the system checks. So we'll do them with the manual checks. We do them with the manual checks. Even some discrepancies, some fields require manual checks. We even need to perform these manual checks, system checks, ultimately in order to identify the discrepancy. So we have discrepancy management. We have discrepancy management. We'll identify the discrepancy, we'll locate the discrepancy, and we resolve the discrepancy. Okay. So we'll identify, locate, resolve. So while resolving also, so we have some are on their own they can correct. On their own their CDM can correct. That is self-evident corrections. Or they can even generate a query. Query they will send it to site. They'll generate a query and they'll send this query to the site for the resolution. So site will update the data by cross-checking with their source. Okay, site will update the data. So it's also called query resolution. So whatever the steps that I'm writing here, okay, this whole process. Okay, so this whole process is divided into three phases: study startup, study conduct, study closeout. That means CDM has three phases in its life cycle. That is study startup, study conduct, study closeout. So startup, conduct, closeout. Okay. So in the entire process, query resolution, discrepancy management will be done. We'll generate a query. Okay, we'll assign this query to site. Site will resolve the query. Okay, site will give the resolution and site only will update the data if they have access. Otherwise, site will send that resolution to the CDM. CDM will update the data. It depends. So once all the queries are done, once all the discrepancies are resolved, once all the queries are resolved, no more changes, no more updates, no more modifications to the data, then we lock and freeze the data. In order to prevent unauthorized changes, unauthorized modifications, will prevent the data. Will prevent unauthorized changes. So we do lock to prevent unauthorized changes. We do lock. So finally, we'll extract the data to SAS systems or Excel files. Okay. So then, okay, SAS teams will be working on this. Statistical people will be working on this. SAS team, what they do, they will analyze the data. Once the validation done, once you know the data is clean and valid, okay, so they analyze as well. They represent the data. They analyze, they represent the data in the TLF, table listing figure, and submit to FDA. ఎర్రగడ్డ అని పోయి బాబు 50 టీమర్లు ఉంటుంది ఎర్రగడ్డ. Okay. So they analyze and they represent the data. So this is the complete data workflow. So clinical trial team, CDM, SAS. So clinical trial team responsible for conducting trial, collecting data. CDM ensured the data is clean, complete, valid, accurate. Then the SAS will analyze, represent the data into TLF, table listing figures, and submit to, they'll prepare a report and submit to FDA. Okay. So as I said, CDM life cycle has a 3 phases. All the 3 phases I'm going to cover theoretically, practically. Both will be done. Theoretical classes and practical classes. The complete starting to ending, the whole process, the whole CDM process will be covered. So what are all the job roles you can apply? Mainly clinical data coordinator, clinical data associate, okay, data coordinators, data associates, data managers. In these levels only we have associate levels, senior levels, lead positions. Okay. So here I have the list of job roles. These are all the job roles you can apply. Okay. So when it comes to company, any CRO company you can apply. Any CRO company you can apply. Okay. Any CRO. Which is contract research organization. So usually the CRO companies can be IT companies. For the outsourcings, it can be IT company. It can be any MNC company, or it can be any small scale companies. So this could be any um, pharma companies also. Some pharma companies also work as CRO. So in any of these, you can search for the jobs like Novartis, Parexel, Icon, IQVIA, Synos, Roche Pharma, Johnson and Johnson. Okay. Um, Parexel, Novartis, okay, TCS, CTS, okay, Accenture. Like this, we have um, different job roles. Okay. So when it comes to curriculum, okay. So curriculum will be, I'm going to start with the clinical research theory. In the first part, I'll cover clinical trial theory. Clinical trial theory, process of the clinical trial, um, team, whoever all involved in the clinical trials, and protocol, CRF, ICF, all with the examples, live examples, and the guidelines, SOP, 21 CFR, IRB, okay, guidelines, GCP guidelines. Okay, so we have all GCP guidelines. CDM theory also will be done. So clinical research theory, clinical trial theory, CDM theory, and hands-on practical training will be done. Hands-on practical training on the database. So here I'm going to take one study and will be doing one project. Okay, so here two databases will be covered. Complete hands-on will be on Oracle Clinical. We have Ray VDC also. While explaining on the Oracle Clinical, I'll be covering Ray VDC also, but with the PowerPoint presentations. With the PowerPoint presentations. Okay. Right. So duration it will be hands-on practical training means you'll be getting access to the database and you'll be working on the database. You'll be working on database. So duration it will take 8 weeks, which will be 2 months, Monday to Friday. Monday to Friday. Okay, classes will be holding Monday to Friday, daily 1 hour. Daily 1 hour. Okay. And what are all the features of the training? So features include every session you'll get the notes. Every session you'll get the recording link. So we have assignments. We also have assessments conducted. Okay. Mock interviews. Interview questions. Mock interviews. Interview questions. Resume preparation will be done. Direct access to database. Direct access to database and certificate also will be provided. Training certificate will be provided. So these are the features of the training. Okay. In the CTM theory, all the guidelines and all the documentation, whatever required, the complete process, like startup till closeout, entire process will be covered. Okay, reconciliations, validations, everything will be covered. Lock and freeze. Documentation like DMP, CCG, all the documents will be covered. Okay. So, okay, so this is what your complete process of the clinical trial and the role of CTM in the clinical trial process. Okay. So I'll just show you database. So this is Oracle Clinical. Along with Oracle Clinical, Oracle RDC also will be covered. It's called OCRDC. So that is a product of the Oracle only. So which will be used for the data entry and data validation, specifically data entry and data validation. So I'm just entering. So this is the database you see. See, we have all these subsystems. This is a super user, in fact. Super user means here I have all the access, complete access, like startup, conduct, closeout. So every access I have here. So admin, we are not going to touch anyway, but plan, design, glib, definition, conduct, data entry, labs, how to handle the lab data and data entry, entering the data into databases. In the conduct, we have validations, discrepancy, okay, extraction, data extraction into SAS data sets, and lock and freeze, security. And we create the um, CRF, case report forms. Generally, to collect the data into database, you must have electronic CRFs. So those CRFs also will be designed here. The study and the CRF both will be designed here in the database. Okay. So this is your database we are going to work. Okay. Complete project I'm going to take. It's not like everyone will share the same project. So while teaching, I'll explain on one project. Individually, you're going to select one project and start practicing on your own project. It's not common project to everyone. Okay. So I have done with my session. Okay. So tomorrow, same time with the same link you can attend. Okay. So tomorrow I'm going to explain the CTM workflow. When you are in CDM, what exactly we do. So what is your role? Okay. Complete workflow of the CDM. What exactly CDM team do? I'm going to explain. Okay. Similarly, I'm going to cover clinical trial process in detail. Clinical trial process outline we did here. Okay. So, but that is in the next class. So first we'll learn CDM workflow. If you have any questions, please do tell me. So any questions you have, you can ask, please. You can unmute and you can ask.